Hi, you're watching theAnalysis-news, and I'm your host, Talia Baroncelli. I'll shortly be joined by Joshua Landis, who is an amazing historian and expert on the Middle East. We'll be speaking about the strike which killed 3 U.S. service members in Jordan, as well as numerous other strikes in Syria and Iraq. If you enjoy this content and would like to support us, you can do so by going to our website, theanalysis.news, and hitting the donate button at the top right corner of the screen. Make sure you get onto our mailing list. That way you always get the updates whenever we send out our shows. And subscribe and like the show wherever you listen to or watch your podcast, be it on YouTube, Spotify, or Apple. Stay tuned for my interview with Joshua Landis. I'm very excited to have Joshua Landis here with me today. He is the director of the Center for Middle East Studies and Sandra Mackey professor at the University of Oklahoma. He's also a non-resident fellow at the Quincy Institute for Responsible Statecraft. Thanks so much for joining me today, Joshua.
Talia, it's a pleasure.
Well, why don't we start off with the U.S. troop presence in the Middle East? We've been seeing lots of strikes, both in Syria and in Iraq. I should also mention that there are 900 U.S. troops in Syria, as well as 2,500 U.S. troops in Iraq, to give some context there. And we also, unfortunately, saw 3 U.S. service members killed in a drone strike on a U.S. base in Jordan. And in retaliation, one of the senior leaders of Kataib Hezbollah was killed in a drone strike in Baghdad recently. And as a result of this, one of the Iraqi Army spokespersons said that the U.S. should definitely withdraw, that their presence in Iraq is a source of instability, and, such strikes in a very densely populated area in Baghdad obviously aren't welcome. So given these recent strikes, do you see the U.S. drawing down their forces anytime soon?
Well, it much depends on what happens with this, with these negotiations of the strategic position of the United States in Iraq. The Prime Minister al-Sudani has started this initiative to ask the United States to leave, or at least to renegotiate its position, which would draw down forces and restrict what they can do. Now, the United States has a lot of leverage in Iraq, and the Iraqis, many Iraqis, do not want the United States to leave because they're a counterbalance to Iran. Also, the United States has many weapons they can use against Iraq, such as sanctions. And we know that Syria is under very strict sanctions, so is Iran. And both countries use Iraq, particularly the Iranians, as a lung to enter into international banking through Iraqi banks. And the United States has been adding sanctions on various Iraqi banks who've been helping the Iranians get dollars and do their financial, access the international banking system through Iraq. So were the United States to leave and be pushed out, they might very well begin to sanction Iraq in a much more comprehensive way, which would hurt Iraqi politicians. So Iraq has to be very careful. And of course, the Kurds in the north do not want the United States to leave. There are many actors in Iraq who don't. Iraq, as we know, is an extremely divided country. So there are people who want Americans, but in general, killing top Iraqi officials, and of course, just regular Iraqis with these strikes killed 16 Iraqis, a number of civilians, 24 more were wounded. That infuriates Iraqis. They don't want their sovereignty constantly jeopardized through these American strikes. And particularly, they don't want to become, as they reiterate over and over again, to become a battleground between Iran and the United States. The United States is there to help their military build up, to help them fight ISIS. But all this other stuff that causes the deaths of important politicians is infuriating for Iraqis. So the pressure to push America out is building. and that will damage America's position, and it'll hurt. It's going to help Iran, obviously, and the Iranian. Much of the Iraqi political interests are very pro-Iranian. So they're sharpening their knives and hoping to drive this tit-for-tat war up to a crescendo where Iraqis will just say, get out. And that will, one of the main objectives of Iran and the Iranian militias that are connected to Iran in Iraq and Syria is to get America out of both Syria and Iraq. And I don't think they're going to stop until they achieve their ends.
Right. You recently wrote a piece for the Quincy Institute in which you said that it's not just Iran who wants the U.S. to leave the region, but also Iraq, Syria, and Turkey. And that begs the question, why is the U.S. there in the first place? I know that initially a lot of those troops that were sent to Iraq and Syria were there in order to fight ISIS, but can you even tenuously argue that that mandate is still valid and that's why they're still there? Or has the goal sort of changed now where it's just a matter of self-preservation and self-perpetuation to try to preserve their presence there for the sake of it?
Well, I think you're absolutely right, Talia. You hit the, you put your finger on it, because the original mission was to overturn Saddam Hussein in 2003, which led us into Iraq in the first place. But America withdrew under President Obama largely, and then ISIS exploded because America was helping to organize the overthrow of Assad's government in 2011 when the Arab Spring broke out in Syria. And the United States was pumping billions of dollars by 2012 into an effort to build up Syrian opposition groups. And Saudi Arabia, America's allies, Saudi Arabia, Turkey, Qatar, and others, were also sending in billions of dollars and lots of arms. America was trying to orchestrate this through the CIA centers, both in Turkey and in Jordan. But that caused the Syrian army to almost collapse, and it had to withdraw from all of eastern Syria. And that meant that eastern Syria became a playground for these various militias. And ISIS, which had been al-Qaeda in Iraq, which had been largely suppressed by American forces, sprung up in Syria and could spread out along the Euphrates, take Raqqa, set up ISIS as we saw in 2015, it's spreading back into Iraq 2014, and building a state the size of Great Britain. Then America remobilized and had considerable sympathy from Iraqi government in helping to destroy ISIS. Of course, it infuriated Turkey because it meant America's strategy was to arm the Kurds in Syria and to build a Kurdish-led militia, which is now called the Syrian Democratic Forces, which are connected to a virulent anti-Turkish movement inside Turkey, the PKK. And so Turkey looks at this as America stabbing them in the back and supporting a terrorist organization. So Turkey is dead set against America being in the region, having its bases, and training and paying for these Kurdish forces to be strong. So you're right. And Syria is dead set against it because America's policy has metastasized and changed, as you indicated, to no longer being anti-ISIS. It does have an anti-ISIS element to it, but it's largely there to punish Assad, keep him weak. America's taken all of Syria's best oil fields, gas fields, which are in the northeast, as well as its best agricultural land, and has turned that over to the Kurds, which supports the American effort and American proxy armies there, but is denied to the Syrian people. So the Syrian government doesn't have enough oil or gas to run its own electric stations. Syrians get about an hour, 2 hours maximum of electricity a day. They live without refrigerators. They can't, they're freezing in the wintertime. My wife is Syrian, and her family are all in Syria. And when we talk to them now, they're sitting there in their winter jackets, freezing in their houses because there's no heat. And they have to go shopping at certain times of day so that if they get chicken, they can eat it immediately because the butcher only slaughters chicken at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, ready for dinner time, because the chickens will go bad. They don't have refrigeration. The whole place is a mess. And they blame this in part on the Americans for taking their oil and gas, supporting this Kurdish quasi-independence movement, and building up an army there and depriving them of important resources. So the Syrian government doesn't want them. The Iraqi government is increasingly doesn't want them. The Turkish government, doesn't want them. Of course, the Kurds do, because the Middle East, as you know, is extremely divided along these ethnic and religious divisions. So America's got more and more enemies on its hands who are looking to drive it out and are encouraging groups like Kataib Hezbollah, whose leader was just killed by America, to attack the bases and try to drive them out. Iran, of course, doesn't want them there for the obvious reasons. So the United States is staying there in part because it doesn't want to lose in an election year when President Biden would be accused of being weak, and where Kurds would be hurt if America pulls out, just the way the pro-American Afghans were hurt. And so he doesn't want an Afghan 2 on his hands before an election. So he does not want to leave, and we're trying to stay. And that cycle of America, coming up with these new reasons to stay in a place where their job, defeating ISIS, is largely completed. And it must be said that in the long run, the only way to keep ISIS from growing up again is to have strong central governments with competent police forces that can police their countries. And this was a situation before America invaded Iraq. Obviously, they were distasteful dictators, but there was no ISIS. There was no Al-Qaeda. Those were introduced to the region when America destroyed the central governments and the central government of Iraq, where there was no government. And of course, Al-Qaeda just poured into the country, as did these other jihadist groups, and they metastasized. So anyway, the long run, both the Syrian government and the Iraqi government are going to have to take care of ISIS, and they're largely capable of doing it today. And if America wants to assist them in doing that, it can do so from Qatar, from Turkey, from distant, from neighboring countries like Kuwait. It does not have to have troops inside Iraq and Syria. And keeping them there is going to endanger American troops, because these are small bases scattered around in these desert areas, and they're sitting ducks with a neighborhood that does not want them there.
Yeah, they're sitting ducks with technological systems that are perhaps failing if the drones were able to get through those defense systems, whereas the groups that are attacking them are able to regroup and to move around, whereas the service members on the bases can't do that. So, as you said, they're sitting ducks. But they're sitting ducks,
but America's technology has been very good. In Jordan, the base that was attacked, evidently they did not have appropriate technology to see these drones coming in. Somehow, I think that because the base was in Jordan, America thought it would not be attacked, as were the bases in Iraq and Syria, where there's much more sophisticated anti-aircraft, radars and other technology. So these anti-American Iraqi groups found a vulnerability, and they exploited it by getting their drone into that base in Jordan. So I'm sure that American generals are thinking, well, we can patch this up. We can get that kind of technology into our bases in Jordan, and we can keep Americans safe. I'm sure that's a counter narrative going on in the American military, and that's probably what's going to happen, because Biden's not going to withdraw if he can help it before elections.
Well, I do want to pick up on something you mentioned earlier, and that was the ethnic as well as sectarian tensions which exist in the Middle East. But you're a historian, so I'm sure you would know that some of these are also in a way propped up by different military presences within the region. So, for example, during the war in Iraq, the U.S. also gave money to various groups to side with them, and in a way, that created the conditions for ISIS to come in. But that probably, I'm not a historian, but I would assume that also played into a lot of the divisions which existed or exacerbated them or shifted them around. So it's not like we're dealing with fixed categories here. And you often hear people say, oh, people in the Middle East have been hating each other and killing each other for thousands of years, so they're just going to continue doing so without looking at the actual political and economic factors which are playing into these conflicts. So I wonder what you make of that.
Well, you're absolutely right, Talia. If I can, you're absolutely right. The United States, as all imperial powers, have used divide and conquer as a primary weapon in order to insert themselves here, and that's what America did in defeating Saddam Hussein. And our most crude and simple strategy in 2003, when we conquered Iraq and destroyed the central state, was to throw the Sunni Arabs who dominated Saddam's Ba'athist government. Saddam was a Sunni from Tikrit. The Ba'ath Party and the military, the top positions were dominated by Sunni Arabs who had ruled under the Ottomans and continued to rule under the Faisal regime, the Hashemite kingdom, and then under the Ba'ath Party. The majority of the population, of course, were Shiites, who America looked to and catapulted from the bottom of society to the top. And the Shiites had been badly discriminated against under the Ottoman Empire, and also not discriminated against under the Ba'athist regime. So America catapulted them to the top of society. And today, and ever since America's been there, the prime minister has been a Shiite. And so this kindled a terrible civil war. And that's what Al-Qaeda and ISIS were, various incarnations of fighting groups that were trying to put the Sunnis back into power and were highly discriminatory against the Shiites. And Zarqawi, who led Al-Qaeda in Iraq, was virulently anti-Shiite. And this kind of sectarian tension had not existed at that level in Iraqi society before America entered in. And the Civil War just drove this hatred. And of course, America privileged the Kurds and gave them autonomy in the north, which they enjoy. And the Iraqi army doesn't go into the north, the Kurdish regions. They have their own Peshmerga army. So Iraq has been severely divided. And one group has been pitted against each other. And we see something very similar happen in the effort to overturn President Assad in Syria. The sectarian animosities and ethnic animosities are high-pitched today in Syria because of that fighting and that civil war that came from having a weak state, which was overturned, where each group began to fight each other and was motivated, really trained to distrust each other. And it's becomes infinitely worse, as you know, since America's attempt to build power sharing, democracy. I mean, if we're going to credit America with those ambitions in going in, they certainly failed. And they've only created a very divided Middle East.
Well, what do you think the game plan is now? Because Secretary of State Lloyd Austin said that, they're engaged in negotiations with Iraq to potentially discuss a drawdown of troops. But after this attack, do you think the attack on service members in Jordan kind of spells the end of any of those negotiations? Or is that sort of just a pretext to say, oh, we're not going to withdraw any troops, and in fact, we might even send more troops to the region?
Well, I think, the Prime Minister El Sudani is engaged in these talks, and he has asked America to leave as well, but he's never set a date. So he is trying to thread this needle of responding to popular outrage and to these militias, the Islamic resistance militias, which are part of the Iraqi government. We have to understand they're part of the government, and they support Soudani. So he has to listen to them. They could potentially bring down his government. So he's beholden to them, but at the same time, he doesn't want America to be pushed out entirely. He wants to keep the goodwill of America and balance Iranian influence with it. So he's in a very difficult position, and I think he's trying to throw this to committees and speak one thing on one hand and to do something different on the other hand. But America's clearly discussing how it can reduce the number and shift some of what it's supposed to be doing there. The trouble is, as long as there are American soldiers there, the pro-Iranian groups are going to attack them because they want them out altogether. So this is the government in Iraq is weak, and it has been weak, and that's what you get when you have a weak government, is they can't control all these different factions. And foreign countries like America and Iran can play, and Turkey can orchestrate their own groups and their military presence to keep the country very divided and weak, which allows it to become a playground for these proxy wars. And that's just what's happening because, Gaza has inflamed the entire world, the entire Middle East and Arab world in particular, against America. And it's hurting America tremendously. And this whole escalation is in the name of Gaza. Of course, people are using it for their own ends, as Iran is. But the Gaza situation has definitely ratcheted up anti-American feelings and has helped Iran tremendously. It's helped the whole resistance front with these pro-Iranian militias from Hezbollah through the Assad government to Kataib Hezbollah and the others in Iraq who used to be criticized by people throughout all three countries. And today there's much less criticism because they've found a new legitimacy in standing up against Israel and America and on the side of Palestinians. And many Syrians and Lebanese and so forth scoffed at Iran and these pro-Iranian groups and saying, you're not doing anything for Palestine. You're just trying to take control of our countries. And now you don't hear that. I'm sure there are people who still feel that, but they can't express those feelings because they're outraged about what's happening in Palestine.
You've just been watching part 1 of my discussion with Joshua Landis. If you'd like to hear a segment on the proposed ceasefire deal, you can click on part 2. Thanks for watching.